At the beginning of the show, we meet our female lead, Anne, who is thrilled because she just received a scholarship to study abroad. The scene then shifts to the kitchen where her evil aunt, Prawning, spills soup on her mom and angrily scolds a woman, insisting that she asked for curry instead. Just then, Anne arrives home eager to share the good news, but is shocked to see her mom being mistreated. Prawning tries to downplay the incident, saying that the soup was cold and wouldn't have harmed her mom. But our heroine is having none of it, and she retaliates by throwing a bowl of rice at her aunt. It's then revealed that Anne's father was the sole heir of the real estate tycoon, Prawit Changwon-Prawa. When he suddenly passed away, her mom discovered a shocking truth. She found out that her late husband had another wife named Chalita. This woman was also pregnant at the same time as her. However, she died giving birth to a baby boy named Newt. Prawit believes that boys are better suited to rule businesses and naturally desires his grandson Newt to be the rightful heir of the Changwon-Prawa's empire instead of Anne. Following the death of her father, Anne and her mother lost their significance in the family and became mere residents in the house. They've been oppressed by Anne Prawning for far too long. It's also revealed that the evil woman has taken responsibility for Newt's care. She understands that despite having a son named Rhett, an outside grandson can never be as important like an inside grandson like Newt. In the present, Prawning continues to belittle Anne and her mother, constantly reminding them of their low status in the household. When our heroine has had enough, she pushes her aunt away and takes her mother to another room. She then reveals her scholarship news and says that they no longer need to endure such mistreatment. She assures her mother that the university will cover her fees and accommodation and that she has savings to support them. Later, they visit Grandpa, who is the head of the family. Anne excitedly shares about her scholarship, but the old man doesn't seem to be too thrilled. He insists that she study locally and intern at his company instead. Frustrated, Anne confronts him about his preference for boys over girls and declares that she wants to prove her worth outside the family. She firmly rejects his financial support and tells him to save it for his grandson. She then packs up her things and urges her mom to join her, but the poor woman decides to stay because of family pressure. Anne understands her predicament and promises to return soon. Her only mission is to show her stubborn grandpa that girls are just as capable as boys. In the next scene, we're introduced to our male lead, Cure, who's preparing for a special day. He's ecstatic as he plans to propose to his girlfriend and make her his life partner. He goes to a restaurant with an engagement ring and eagerly awaits for her arrival. However, when his girlfriend Phim arrives, she seems different and kind of upset. She then asks why he called her here. Cure excitedly proposes to her with a ring, but soon notices that she already has one on her finger. As he stares in shock, Phim abruptly says that they should break up. She then apologizes and leaves without an explanation. This leaves our hero devastated since he imagined being with her for eternity. He becomes even more depressed when he sees her with another man. In the aftermath of this brutal rejection, Cure walks out into the rain and drinks heavily. He ends up sitting beside a garbage bin crying and wondering why Phim changed her mind at the last moment. Coincidentally, Anne passes by the same road and notices him crying alone. Realizing he's been hurt, she leaves her umbrella next to him, writes a note, and slips it into his pocket before walking away. The next day, Anne is leaving for America with her best friend Ket accompanying her to the airport. Elsewhere, Cure wakes up near the dustbin and is surprised to find himself under an umbrella. He also finds the note in his pocket, which tells him to remember his worth, not to let anyone diminish him, and to move forward in life. Inspired by the words, our hero frames it and keeps it in his office as a reminder of his worth. 8 years have passed and Cure has moved on and settled into a new life. One morning, his assistant informs him that his grandmother, the head of their company, Ishara, wants to see him in her office. Surprised by the unusual call-up, Cure heads out and is shocked to see Phim after all this time. She teases him about not being able to wear his tie properly. Her gesture brings back memories of when she used to help him with it when they were together. Confused and hurt, Cure asks why she's here. Phim excitedly reveals that she and her husband have come all this way to meet his grandmother. The man then introduces himself as Newt and exchanges pleasantries with Cure. But our hero doesn't want to engage in conversation, so he quickly excuses himself. He goes straight to his grandma's office, where she reveals that Newt from JP Company is interested in a collaboration. She explains that they want to build a tower in Phuket City and have chosen Cure to lead the project because of his expertise. Our hero is hesitant as he doesn't want to work with his ex's husband, but his grandmother reassures him that he can review the project first. Cure reluctantly takes the documents to begin his preparations, but his mind can only think of the unexpected encounter with Phim after all these years. His grandmother also mentions the newly appointed company advisor, Dr. Ann Jong, a renowned economist from abroad who will be joining them soon. Afterward, our hero meets with Newt to talk about the project and expresses his lack of interest in it, but Newt invites him to visit Phuket City to see the potential of their joint venture. Although Cure doesn't want to go, he agrees for the sake of the company. Following this, we're shown Anne arriving at the airport. Her friend Ket greets her and curiously asks about her sudden return after 8 years. Anne explains that she's starting a new job at the Ishra Company and requests to stay at her place for a while. Ket welcomes her with open arms and jokingly asks if she's back to seek revenge on her grandfather. However, Anne, who's focused on her career, quickly dismisses the idea. That evening, as she's out to buy some noodles, she encounters a guy in a hoodie who seems suspicious. Startled, she throws the noodles at him, causing him to slip and fall. Anne then confronts him and asks why he's following her. Surprisingly, the guy turns out to be Cure, and he explains that he wasn't following her. He was simply out for one of his usual jogs. He insists that he's not a bad person and tries to show her something. However, this scares Anne, prompting her to run away. In the meantime, Vim searches for her husband but can't find him at home. Worried that he's cheating on her, she uses a GPS tracker and locates him at a hotel. She then rushes to the said place and gets a keycard to the room. As soon as Vim opens the door, she finds him sleeping with another woman. Newt tries to apologize, but she asserts that this is his last chance. Turns out Newt is a serial cheater and a gaslighter. He blames Vim for not sleeping with him, saying it forces him to seek other women, but she angrily retorts, saying that the reason she doesn't sleep with him is because of his infidelity. The next day, Anne arrives at her workplace at the JP Company. She gets straight into action and discusses the joint venture project with the chairwoman. When she asks why they're taking such a risky step, the old woman explains that the JP Company will be their rival if they reject their terms. So, she encourages Anne to work on the project with her grandson. Later, as Anne is returning home, she accidentally hits someone with her car. The injured man confronts her, and it turns out to be none other than our hero, Cure. Both are surprised to have come across each other once again. Anne apologizes and offers him money for treatment, but he angrily refuses. He instead asks for her number, claiming he might need to contact her if the pain worsens. Our heroine doesn't want to share her number with a stranger, but she has no choice but to oblige. Later, she talks about her day and subsequent accident with Ket. To her surprise, she learns that Cure lives in the same apartment as her friend. Ket then encourages her to check on his injuries, and even teases her, saying that they would make a beautiful couple. Taking her advice, Anne goes to Cure's apartment with a first aid kit. There, she discovers documents related to the Ishra project and realizes that he's the grandson of the company's owner, Kamalas. Anne then treats his wound and promises to check on him regularly. This kind gesture melts our hero's heart, and it appears that he started to like her. The following day, Anne prepares to visit the Ishra Company, but before that, she arrives at Cure's place to treat his wounds. She lovingly changes his dressing and applies some medicine to it. Once she's done, she finds an earring on the floor and asks if it belongs to his girlfriend. Cure admits that he doesn't have a girlfriend and simply lies that it must be his sister's. Through a flashback, we learn that the earring is actually a gift he gave to Vim while they were together. Later at work, Cure visits his grandmother and agrees to take on the project in Phuket City. She then introduces their new advisor, Anne, who will be working closely with him on this project. Our hero is surprised when he learns that their economic advisor is none other than Anne, who goes by the name Dr. Jong. He suspects that she recognized him earlier and was simply stalking him to get to know more about him. However, Anne swears that she didn't know he was the heir to the Ishra Company until yesterday. They then discuss the project in Cure's office, where he suggests she come to his apartment to discuss further. Anne initially hesitates, but due to time constraints, she agreed. Later, Cure arrives at Vim's place and returns the earring to her. He explains that it was just lying around the house for years and wanted to give it back to its owner. Vim is delighted by the gesture and suggests they go for lunch. However, he advises her to move on from their past relationship, which ended 8 years ago. As he starts to leave, Vim suddenly faints and begins bleeding. This worries our hero, so he rushes her to the hospital. In the next scene, the doctor reveals that she's been diagnosed with a rare disease that caused the bleeding. He then schedules further tests, including a biopsy, and urges her to focus on her health. Meanwhile, Anne waits outside Cure's apartment to discuss the project as planned earlier. Our hero arrives late from dropping off Vim and finds her nodding off outside his apartment door. He apologizes and suggests they eat dinner. Anne is initially upset at him for making her wait so long, but afterwards they prepare dinner and discuss business. Anne says that she will head to Phuket the next day so she can gather more information about their partners. Only if she likes their infrastructure can they proceed with the collaboration. Cure likes the idea and decides to join her after a few days. The following morning, Anne arrives in Phuket, and the first thing she does is visit her mom at her grandfather's place. They exchange a warm hug, but Anne's mood instantly changes when she notices fresh wounds on her mom's hand. She then learns from the maid that Aunt Prawning continues to harass her. Even after all these years, her mom is still treated like a mere maid at the Chawang Prawa's house. This makes our heroine livid, and she becomes determined to take action against the culprits. Just then, Kura surprises Anne by showing up without informing her. He overhears her conversation with Mom, but doesn't ask about it. Instead, he explains that he has flown in early to assist her in gathering the business information about their project. Afterward, they visit a cafe where Kure introduces her to Son, his detective friend. They discuss JP Corporation, revealing its significant influence in trade and industry in Phuket. The scene then shifts to JP headquarters, where Grandpa pressures Newt into securing the joint venture contract with Ishra Company. He says that the deal is very important for their future. On the other hand, Kure and Anne discuss an upcoming party hosted by JP Company's chairman. He invites her as his date, hoping to make a positive impression there. Our heroine immediately agrees, as she can't wait to confront her grandfather. By the look on her face, it's also evident that she likes spending time with Kure. Later at the party, Anne arrives with her date, shocking the old man. She casually remarks that he must have missed her after all these years. When he asks why she's there, she reminds him that she belongs to the family as well. Meanwhile, Kure is taken aback when he realizes that Anne is actually the granddaughter of Prawit, the chairman of JP Company. When he confronts her about it later, she explains that she doesn't consider them family at all. She then confides in him about her troubled past with Grandpa and recalls childhood incidents of his gender bias and academic pressure. Anne says that she's come a long way to assert her independence and prove her worth in her grandfather's eyes. Moved by her story, Kure reassures her of his support and suggests a fresh start together. She happily agrees, but suggests they focus more on their business project for now. The next day at JP Company, tensions escalate as Anne confronts challenges from a male-dominated corporate culture. She navigates office politics and biases while advocating for her clients' best interests. She also confronts Grandpa about his dismissive attitude towards her and insists he keep an open mind in business decisions. But the stubborn old man becomes furious and tells her to leave his office. Later, when the two are returning to their hotel room, he suggests they move into a new place so that they can continue to work on their business discreetly. Our heroine likes the idea, but decides to take a shower first. Once she's done, she suddenly remembers that she didn't bring any clothes inside to change. Anne shyly asks Kure to close his eyes while she gets out of the washroom to retrieve her dress. But he takes her by surprise and hugs her from behind. This leaves them both emotionally charged, and they end up kissing passionately. The following day, we see them moving into a new apartment. While unpacking, she notices an umbrella and some cute items, along with a note from 8 years ago. It's the same note and umbrella she left beside a broken-hearted man. Anne immediately recognizes her handwriting and smiles as she realizes they met long ago. During bedtime, she talks about it with Kure, but he is understandably shocked. He notes that perhaps they were destined to be together. In the meantime, we see Phim drinking at a bar with her friend. She confesses that she still regrets choosing Newt over Kure. The friend advises her that if she wants to pursue her crush, she has to get a divorce first. Phim acknowledges her friend's suggestion and decides to do something about her failing marriage. She certainly does appear to have something brewing in her mind. The following day, she visits Kure at the office and starts emotionally blackmailing him. She claims that she's unwell and insists she needs to go to the hospital. She then asks him to take her since her husband Newt is busy in an important meeting. Kure is oblivious about her intentions, so he agrees to go with her the next day. Later during a meeting, Newt is informed by his assistant Amara that Anne has taken some accounting files for her audit work. Here, it's revealed that Amara is Rhett's girlfriend, and Rhett is Praning's son, who also works at the JP Company. However, Grandpa never seems to give him any importance and only prioritizes Newt. In the meantime, Kure and Anne are going through the accounting files of the JP Company as they come close to announcing their decision on the joint venture project. Just then, Grandpa passes by their office and decides to check on them. He finds Anne engrossed in her work and asks if something is bothering her. He then offers his help, but she firmly declines and continues working. Later at home, the old man has a conversation with Anne's mother as he wants to know more about his granddaughter. Mom then proudly reveals that Anne has completed a PhD in economics in America and was a prominent assistant professor at a university. The misogynistic grandpa is shocked to hear that his own granddaughter has achieved so much. He looks impressed and suggests they invite Anne over to the house. As the workday ends, Son the assistant enters the meeting room where Newt is working. She tries to seduce him, and he falls right into her trap. They become intimate, but when Rhett arrives and overhears noises from the meeting room, he is shocked to see his girlfriend and Newt sleeping together. Meanwhile, Kira has invited his detective pals Saw and San over for dinner. They exchange pleasantries and our hero introduces Anne to his friends. When she goes to the kitchen to get the glasses, she overhears them talking about Kira's ex-girlfriend. Anne is shocked to learn that he dated Fim 8 years ago, but she dumped him for the millionaire Newt. The following day, Kira prepares to go to the hospital with Fim, but Anne insists on accompanying them. She reasons that he's flying over to Bangkok soon, so they won't be able to spend much time together. Our hero doesn't want her to get entangled in his past, but he has no choice but to bring her along. Later, when Fim sees the two together, she's visibly upset. In the meantime, someone keeps a close eye on Fim. He turns out to be Newt's informant, who quickly relays the entire scenario to his boss. After the hospital checkup, Kira drives Anne to a place and says he wants to meet someone before leaving for Bangkok. Surprisingly, he stops at her grandfather's house and tells her that he is there to see her mom. Anne hesitates for a while, but eventually invites him in. The visit turns out to be pleasant, and they end up having a nice chat. Kira then suggests that Anne stay with her mom for a few days. At first, she protests, saying that she can't stay at the same house as her grandfather. But after much persistence, she acknowledges his advice and says she'll think about it. The scene then shifts to our hero arriving at his apartment in Bangkok. To his surprise, Fim is standing outside his door with all her luggage. She claims that she just flew here for health treatment. Once again, she cons him into staying the night at his place. Elsewhere in the office, Newt is reviewing accounting files when he notices something amiss. He tells Rhett that there is definitely an issue with the accounts. The profits for the month were higher than expected, but it hasn't shown in the books. He then decides to inform Grandpa about it so they can resolve the issue before it gets big. In the meantime, Anne arrives with her luggage and decides to stay with her mom for a few days. The old man chats with her privately and offers her a job at the JP Company. However, she vehemently refuses it, explaining that Ishra has given her a voice and a chance to showcase her skills, which his company doesn't offer. Hearing her decision, Grandpa becomes furious and realizes that she wants to pursue her own path. Later that night, when Newt arrives, he becomes overjoyed to see Anne finally back in their house. It's revealed that despite being half-siblings, they have a good relationship. They keep their work relationship aside and talk like friends. Newt questions if Kira is a good person, and she assures him that he has been very nice to her. In the next scene, we're taken to Bangkok, where Fim tries to seduce Kira by wearing a revealing nightdress. When he tells her to go to sleep, she continues to cling to him like a leech. However, our hero is not impressed by her and suggests she act decently because she's a married woman. Meanwhile, Newt talks about his failing marriage with Anne. He claims that he loves Fim, but she's not reciprocating his efforts. He admits that although they're married, she refuses to sleep with him. Because of this, he often finds himself with other girls, and Fim shows no interest in repairing their relationship. Anne asks how she can help, but Newt admits he doesn't know. He simply warns her not to let their relationship be jeopardized because of Fim. The next morning, Ket hears some strange noises coming from outside her apartment. She thinks her friend has returned and goes to check. However, when she reaches Kira's place, she is shocked to see Fim at the door. This worries her, so she immediately calls Anne and informs her about the situation. Elsewhere, Newt is in a meeting when he suddenly receives a message with a picture. Apparently, his informant Khan has followed Fim and Kira to Bangkok and has been stalking them for days. Newt is visibly upset after seeing the photo and calls Fim to know about her whereabouts. But she blatantly lies and says that she's at their company resort, a place she often visits after a fight with him. Shortly after, Fim hears a ring at the door and expects it to be the food delivery. But to her surprise, it turns out to be Anne, who is visibly furious. She introduces herself as Kira's girlfriend and demands to know why Fim, a married woman, is at his apartment. The latter responds that she's his ex-girlfriend and has every right to be here. She even accuses our heroine of trying to integrate into Kira's rich family because she was thrown out of hers. However, Anne corrects her, explaining that she left her family by choice and not the other way around. Fim tries to say that she's misunderstood and shows a picture of Kira hugging her. This leaves our heroine completely heartbroken, and she starts to doubt her boyfriend. She then leaves in tears and goes over to her friend Ket's place to talk about the matter. After hearing everything, Ket suspects that Fim is using her medical condition as an excuse for sympathy. So she tells Anne not to jump to conclusions without talking to her boyfriend first. Meanwhile, Kira visits his grandmother at her office and talks about Anne. He admits that he likes her, and the old woman happily accepts their relationship. She reveals that she's always liked Anne's intelligence and dedication at the workplace. Later, when he returns home, he's surprised to find Anne instead of Fim. She reveals that she chased away the bitch because it was the right thing to do. On being asked why he lied to her, Kira admits that he was only concerned for Fim. He then apologizes repeatedly and promises to be honest with her from now on. At JP Company, Newt notices that some of the accounting documents are missing and that someone is trying to meddle with their company profits. The following day, Fim receives a call from the hospital and is surprised to learn that she's pregnant. This leaves her confused about what to do next, and she briefly considers confiding in Newt, but ultimately decides against it. In the meantime, the spy Con continues to follow her and Cure's movements. He learns that Cure and Anne are actually in the city for a meeting with another rival company. Turns out they're planning to invest in this company instead of JP. The spy quickly calls Newt and informs him about it. When the grandfather learns about this, he accuses Newt of being unable to secure the joint venture project and orders him to handle the situation immediately. The next morning, Newt arrives in Bangkok and tries to schedule a meeting with the rival company, but he soon discovers that Cure and Anne have already met the executives and are positive about their proposal. He later confronts Cure for the double dealing and suggests they sit for lunch to discuss the company's proposal thoroughly. Our hero is hesitant at first as he doesn't want to deal with JP anymore, but after a lot of convincing, he agrees. Surprisingly, when Newt presents his company's proposal with renewed terms and conditions, they're left impressed. They then decide to collaborate, but Cure says they also need to get his grandmother's approval. That night, Fim and Newt return to Phuket, but continue to argue like children. He accuses her of trying to seduce her ex-boyfriend, while she accuses him of infidelity. Fim becomes so enraged that she even demands a divorce. But before Newt can answer, Grandpa appears and summons him for an important meeting. He confronts him about the discrepancies in the accounting files. The old man questions how the company's profits could be 30% higher when Newt had personally verified them. The latter acknowledges his mistake and promptly apologizes. But in reality, he remains assured that something is amiss with the audit files. So he decides to investigate the matter personally. Elsewhere, as our couple is having a lunch with their detective friends, they are targeted by an unknown assailant. Con, who has been keeping an eye on them, notices the attacker aiming a gun at Cure. He reacts swiftly and distracts the man, causing his shot to go astray. But it still ends up wounding our hero's arm. Con then follows the attacker on his bike and manages to stop him at the corner of the street, but the shooter gains the upper hand and injures him before escaping the scene. Shortly after, Cure's detective friends inform him that the shooter has been found dead on the next street. Meanwhile, Anne confronts Newt asking if he orchestrated the attack on Cure. Fim also arrives and asks him the same question repeatedly. Newt angrily responds that he has zero interest in hurting Cure. However, Rhett, who happens to be listening to their conversation from another room, looks visibly pleased. A flashback then reveals that he was the one who orchestrated the shooting, as he wants to create a tension between the JP and Ishara companies. Later, Anne argues with her grandfather over business matters and insists Ishara should not collaborate with JP after the attempted murder. The old man rebukes her for mixing personal issues with professional decisions, but she remains firm in her decision. Afterward, Anne confides in her mother and expresses concern about the recent events. Mom advises her to be cautious and shockingly reveals that her dad's death was not an accident. Although the police and media made it look like one, she always suspected otherwise. Anne then wonders why her grandfather never mentioned her father's suspicious death. The next day, the Ishara's company chairwoman arrives at JP and announces that she won't sign the deal until she knows who shot her grandson. She reveals that Newt is the prime suspect due to Cure's past relationship with Fim. Grandpa does not take her decision well, so he lashes out at his grandsons and orders them to fix the situation. Later, Newt and Fim argue about the recent shooting incident. He insists that he had nothing to do with it, but she continues to suspect him because he had once threatened to end Cure's life. At the police station, an investigation is going on to find the culprit who attempted to murder Cure. His friends, Saw and San, list all possible suspects and decide to interrogate them. When Newt is called upon, he assures them that although he might look like the prime suspect, he hasn't done anything wrong. The scene then shifts to our couple. As Anne gets ready, Cure helps her with her dress and says he'll wait for her downstairs. He soon takes her to a beautiful island and shares how much she's improved his life. Cure then abruptly takes out a ring from his pocket and proposes to her. Anne is completely taken by surprise, but she happily accepts, realizing that she also loves him dearly. Later, Anne and her mom join Cure and his grandmother for dinner at a restaurant. Both families are overjoyed with the proposal and expect the newly engaged couple to get married soon. In the meantime, Fim reveals to Newt that she's pregnant but has planned to abort due to her recent cancer diagnosis. She learned about it when she had gone to the hospital with Cure. If she doesn't abort the baby, her life will be in danger. The news worries Newt, and he suggests that they seek treatment abroad. However, Fim feels neglected and accuses him of prioritizing the baby's life over hers. Newt says they've been trying for so long and agrees to accept the child even if he's not the father. But Fim remains adamant on the abortion, which makes him suspect that the baby could be Cure's. They then get into a heated argument which ends with Fim slapping him across the face. She also finally decides that she wants a divorce. As Fim leaves the house in tears, she sees Cure about to depart after a small meeting. Once again, she blackmails him emotionally and throws a tantrum to gain his attention. She begs him to help her one last time and take her to their family resort. Cure reluctantly agrees, but decides to inform Anne before they leave. However, Fim stops him from doing so, insisting that she doesn't want to cause any more trouble. Elsewhere, Newt confronts Rhett and says he needs to discuss some accounting issues. He then reveals that he's discovered documents which prove Rhett is meddling with the profits. He now gives him a chance to solve the issue within 2 days, or else he'll inform their grandfather. Rhett doesn't say anything about this, but he cunningly changes the topic and reveals that Fim and Cure have just left for the family resort. Furious, Newt produces a handgun from his drawer and asks when they left. On the other hand, Cure and Fim arrive at the resort, but it starts to rain heavily. She tells him it's already too late and suggests he stay the night. Our hero insists on returning so that Anne doesn't have any misunderstandings, but a downpour causes some issues with the boat, leaving him no choice but to stay back at the resort. Fim then takes this opportunity to talk about her rare medical condition. She keeps on blabbering with a sad face, successfully gaining his sympathy. In the meantime, Anne is worried because she can't reach Cure due to his dead cell phone. Turns out she saw him leaving with Fim, which only heightens her suspicion. The next day, as Fim and Cure prepare to leave, they stumble upon Newt's lifeless body lying on a boat. This shocks them to the core, and the news quickly spreads throughout the country. Shortly after, Anne and her grandfather arrive at the resort and are visibly devastated by Newt's death. The old man believes it wasn't a suicide, but a murder. He asks everyone to leave so he can spend some time alone with his grandson. At this moment, someone calls on Newt's phone, and he answers it. Meanwhile, Cure goes to Anne and tries to clear the misunderstanding. He insists that nothing is going on between him and Fim and that she was simply using him, but our devastated heroine is in no mood to listen to him. After the unexpected death of her half-brother, she is now convinced that Cure has had something to do with it. She then takes off her ring, gives it to him, and says he can give it to Fim instead. Following this, Anne leaves him alone and goes over to her friend's place. She confides in Ket about her troubled relationship with Cure and her distrust of Fim. She also talks about the sudden death of her brother, which has left her shaken. Ket consoles her, saying they will find out the cause of his death very soon. She then mentions that a guy named Tony called earlier to ask about her address. It's revealed that Anne used to work with Tony while she was in America, and he also has a big crush on her. The next day, Grandpa summons Anne to his office and advises her to break up with Cure. He reminds her that Cure is the prime suspect because he seems to have a valid motive to kill Newt. He also assigns a bodyguard for her protection, who is none other than Con. It's revealed that the person who called on Newt's cell phone was Con. They met shortly after and vowed to get to the bottom of this. Grandpa then offers Anne the position of vice president at his company and asks her to resign from Ashara. She is shocked by the grand offer, but says she will think about it. Later, she runs into Cure, who continues to defend himself. He asserts that he had nothing to do with Newt's death and that he's innocent. Just then, an unknown man shows up and calls for Anne. As she turns around, she's shocked to see Tony, the guy she worked with in America. He confesses that he missed her and hugs her tightly. The two then exchange pleasantries and decide to catch up at lunch. Cure can only watch in jealousy as he wonders who this guy could be. In the meantime, Rhett learns about Grandpa's idea to make Anne the vice president of the company. He obviously doesn't like it, so he has a series of meetings with the board of directors, in which he offers them various favors in exchange for voting for him. Elsewhere, Cure's detective friends Saw and San go through the background of every employee in the JP company. The investigation reveals suspicious details about Amara, who is Newt's assistant and Rhett's girlfriend. It's revealed that she had a modest upbringing as a fisherman's daughter, which contrasts sharply with her current job at one of Asia's top companies. The police then question her motives and decide to look further. The next day, Grandpa once again urges Anne to prepare for the announcement regarding the vice president position. She accepts the responsibility, but under the condition that he will have to hear her opinions on business matters. Since the old man can't treat her like a puppet anymore, he reluctantly agrees. Following this, Anne moves to Newt's office and reminisces about the good old days. She had a close sibling relationship with him and misses him dearly. The next day, Fim shows up at the funeral and drops a bombshell. She tells Grandpa that she's pregnant with Newt's child and has come to pay her respects. This shocks the old man, and he fails to come up with a response. Fim then goes to Anne and whispers that the child is actually Cure's, leaving her speechless. Later, our heroine meets with Son and explains that Rhett might have something to do with her brother's death. She reveals that she had seen him leave Newt's office the day before and stole some important files. Son is intrigued by the revelation, and he promises to get to the bottom of it. Afterward, Cure approaches Anne and assures her that the baby is not his. He tries to explain that he was only accompanying Fim to the resort as a friend. He begs for her forgiveness, but she remains hesitant and ignores him. The following day, Anne attends the board meeting to finalize the candidate for the vice president position. Unfortunately, the directors doubt her abilities and refuse to vote for her. Grandpa then proposes a 3-month trial for Anne, after which they can evaluate her abilities and decide their votes. Everyone agrees except Rhett, who feels threatened. Meanwhile, Fim decides to move out of Newt's house, and we see that she's being followed by an unknown person. On the way, she suddenly gets into an accident, leaving her badly injured. Anne and her friends happen to be nearby and rush to her aid. Soon, Cure also arrives at the scene and goes straight to help his ex. When Anne realizes that he cares for her a lot, she becomes visibly upset. Cure then rushes Fim to the hospital, and the doctor asks him to stay by her side. He agrees and quickly asks for her medical reports. Turns out he wants to collect evidence to prove the baby's not his. When he receives the files, he learns that the baby is 15 weeks old. This proves he's not the father, as he wasn't even around 15 weeks ago. Meanwhile, the police continue with the investigation into Newt's death. A senior officer recalls a strange circumstance surrounding Anne and Newt's father's accident. There were no prior issues with the car because the driver always made sure it was in perfect condition. He then recalls a young boy sitting next to the driver's dead body, sobbing uncontrollably. In the next scene, Cure brings over the evidence to Anne and finally proves his innocence. He also apologizes for not giving her enough time and promises to be by her side from now on. Our heroine is moved by his words, so she eventually forgives him. But she doesn't reveal that Grandpa is against the relationship, so they have to tread carefully. Elsewhere, Aunt Prawning receives a call. The caller is none other than the man who had been following Fim on the day of her accident. Turns out Prawning had hired the man to kill Fim so that her son Rhett would become the sole heir of the JP company. She fears that Grandpa might accept Fim after learning that she's pregnant with Newt's baby. That afternoon, Anne musters her courage and goes to talk to her grandfather. She bravely tells him that she and Cure have rekindled their relationship. She also reveals that Fim has cancer and she wants to keep the baby just to secure property ownership. Unfortunately, the old man doesn't take the news very well and begins to have a panic attack. Anne and the rest of the family members rush him to the hospital, and the doctors immediately begin the treatment. Hours later, the doctor finally comes out and tells him that Grandpa has high blood pressure, which resulted in a blood clot in his brain. His condition is now stable, but he needs plenty of rest. Under the circumstances, Anne decides to take the lead in the business as acting president. She then calls a board of directors meeting and announces that she'll be handling all business issues from now on. Rhett is absolutely livid, but he keeps his emotions in check. Anne then says that she also wants to review the canceled project with JP, which angers Rhett even further. The scene then shifts to the hospital where the man hired by Aunt Prawning continues to keep an eye on Fim. We also see that Con is nearby, and it turns out that he's been following the man. He cleverly sends a nurse to her room to divert the man's attention. Just then, Fim's mom shows up and asks why she wasn't informed about the accident and pregnancy. Turns out that Fim and her mother have a strained relationship because the latter forced her to marry Newt instead of Cure. Mom then asks what Grandpa thinks about the baby, to which Fim explains that he's suspicious. He actually doubts the baby's legitimacy and believes it belongs to someone else. Hearing this, Mom insists they prove otherwise so they can lay claim on Newt's property. Meanwhile, the hired spy sees Mom has arrived at Fim's room and realizes he can't kill her just yet. He leaves the hospital for now, but decides to track her under Prawling's instructions. Back at the office, Red and his girlfriend Amara are having a private conversation. He's worried that Anne might discover the financial discrepancies in the accounting files. Amara assures him that she's altered the documents, but he says they haven't solved the issue completely. We are then taken to the police station where Son is suspicious of Amara. She dated both Newt and Red at the same time, but both men are unaware of this. a flashback reveals that the police had an insider at the JP company posing as an intern to investigate the case. Son then urgently calls Anne and relays the information to her. This leaves our heroine puzzled as she doesn't understand Amara's involvement in the case. Meanwhile, Con follows the man from the hospital to learn about his intentions and who his employer is. But the latter soon catches wind of this and stops his car. After getting out of the car, he approaches Con's bike, only to find it empty. In the next scene, we see Amara leaving Rhett's office and getting into an expensive sports car and driving away. Unbeknownst to her, a police officer has been trailing her movements closely. Amara then heads over to the city dock area where her father and brother live as humble fishermen. Surprisingly, we learn that the man who has been instructed to kill Fim is none other than Amara's father. He's also the same culprit who tampered with Anne's dad's car and caused the accident. We then see Con's bike at her father's garage, but Amara is unaware of it. Back at the hospital, Fim's mom prepares to take her home. But before she leaves, she visits Grandpa in the other room and asserts that Newt is the father of Fim's baby. She assures him that the baby will be the heir to the JP's fortune, and the old man seems to agree with her. Later, our heroine arrives at the hospital to see her grandfather. However, he threatens to fire her from JP when he recovers. He accuses her of betraying him by rekindling her relationship with Cure. This angers Anne so much that she decides to resign from the company as soon as he gets well. The following day, she visits the accounting department and asks the manager for the files for every employee over the past 15 years. He mentions that there was a minor miscalculation on last year's documents, but she insists on getting them anyway. This leaves him with no choice but to hand her all the files. Shortly after Anne leaves, he anxiously calls Rhett and tells him about the situation, but the latter says it's no longer his problem. He basically says to the manager that if the discrepancies are found, they could all be exposed. Later, when Anne arrives home with the documents, she discovers that Fim and her mom are already present. Turns out Grandpa has given them permission to stay there from now on. But this doesn't sit well with Prawning, as she wants her son Rhett to take over the empire. The next day, Tony, who has a PhD in accounting, helps Anne audit the company files. He reviews it thoroughly and discovers that it has been edited a couple of times. Furthermore, he also finds that a large amount of profit is missing from the sheets. Elsewhere, Son receives a call from the hospital about an injured person. Turns out to be Con, who has been missing for the past few days. The bodyguard is in such critical condition that he's unable to speak. Meanwhile, the accounting manager is worried about being caught and starts packing to leave the city. But just then, Red appears in a hooded vest and strikes him on the head with a stick. He then drags the manager's body away, muttering that he can't just betray him. The next day, Con finally regains consciousness, though his condition is poor. He's unable to speak, so he asks the doctors to provide him with some notepaper. Shortly after, Anne and the police officers arrive at the hospital, and Con writes something down on the notepad. However, they struggle to decipher his words. Anne later decides to contact the accounting manager, but his phone seems to be off. This makes her suspicious, so she goes to the apartment along with Son and the other police officers. Upon arriving, they learn he's taken all the important documents and disappeared, leading them to believe he has fled the city. Over at the hospital, we see Fim getting an ultrasound. She becomes emotional upon hearing the baby's heartbeat, and the doctor confirms it's a boy. Both Fim and her mother are overjoyed with the news and start crying. The doctor explains that the baby is healthy, but will need to be kept for 8 weeks before being delivered via C-section. However, there's a significant risk during this, as cancer might spread throughout the cervix. If Fim opts for treatment, she would have to abort the baby. Her mom, who initially wanted the child to be born to claim a JP fortune, changes her mind after realizing that her daughter's life is at risk. She then urges Fim to consider an abortion, but the latter adamantly refuses to do so. Later, when the grandfather learns the gender of the baby, he is overjoyed and readily accepts Fim. The following day, Anne arrives at her office and continues to review the accounting files, but she appears to be distracted and struggles to decipher Con's note. Just then, she receives a call from Son, who informs her that they have found the accounting manager's car. At the same time, Anne identifies some letters in the note and realizes that it states Rhett's name. She grows increasingly worried and wonders what the note could be hinting at. Meanwhile, Son heads to the hospital as Con has finally regained his speech. The bodyguard then reveals something, which leaves him in utter shock. The scene then cuts to Cure's apartment, where Son discloses what he's learned so far. He reveals that Anne's father's death was not an accident, but a murder. Con joined the JP company and started as Newt's assistant as he wanted to uncover his own father's death. Turns out, his dad was the personal driver of Anne and Newt's father. It's then suspected that the man who killed the dads might have murdered Newt. The bodyguard also believes that this man is closely related to Rhett and his mom, Prawning. The revelation shocks everyone, especially Anne, who realizes that her relative Rhett might have tampered with the accounting files. She thinks that when Newt learned about it, he was murdered to keep the secret hidden. Cure points out the lack of concrete evidence to arrest the culprits, but this is when Son mentions that they were able to retrieve a blood sample from the boat where they found Newt's body. He now plans to conduct DNA tests on Anne's entire family to identify the source of the blood. The next day, Son and some police officers arrive at the house and collect blood samples for testing. Red is also there, and he looks visibly distressed. Following this, we are taken back to the night when Newt was murdered. As he heads towards the resort to confront Fim and Cure, someone keeps an eye on him. In the present, Aunt Prawning informs Rhett that a letter addressed to Anne arrived the other day. She then reveals that it was sent by the company's accounting manager, leaving him utterly shocked. Meanwhile, Anne and her friend Ket decide to stay at Cruer's house for a few days. They want to find enough evidence to prove that Prawning and her son are guilty of the murders. They then open a letter from the accounting manager and find a flash drive inside. It contains evidence and a note indicating that Rhett is trying to eliminate them. This worries Anne, so she immediately informs Cruer of the situation. Turns out the drive contains all the original accounting documents, and Anne points out that some of them have been edited. They then begin to suspect that Newt's death might have been linked to his discovery of accounting irregularities. Elsewhere, we see Amara's brother Mac bringing food to their dad, who is in hiding. Mac has been noticing that their father has been acting weird lately, so he asks about the situation and their ongoing problems. Meanwhile, Grandpa is finally discharged from the hospital and returns home. The first thing he does is have a private conversation with Fim. He talks about the baby, emphasizing that she shouldn't terminate the pregnancy. He even promises to transfer all the properties to her name. However, Fim reassures him that she's committed to keeping both herself and Newt's baby healthy. On the other side, Fim's mother angrily confronts Prawning and slaps her hard. She demands an explanation, revealing that she's discovered her attempts to harm her daughter. This leaves the cunning bitch speechless, as she doesn't understand how she got exposed. Meanwhile, Mac's father finally reveals the entire truth. He explains that Prawning had hired him to kill Newt's father, and later rehired him to kill Fim and her baby. Hearing this, a horrified Mac questions how she could plot against her own relatives. Dad then honestly admits to having no hand in Newt's murder. He explains that he was trying his best to ensure that they aren't blamed for the murder. Back at the police station, Son learns that Mac's father was selling parts from Khan's bike. He also finds additional clues, such as the missing gloves from the boat's toolbox. This information heightens the tension as they wait for the DNA results to come out. Meanwhile, Rhett takes Amara to a beautiful house and reveals that he just bought it, but this only makes her suspicious as the place looks quite expensive. She speculates that it might be connected to the accounting errors and the lost company profits. She then bluntly asks him if he had anything to do with Newt's murder, but he denies it. This reveals that Amara is unaware of his crimes. Later at home, Rhett is confronted by his mother, and this is when he finally confesses about the unfortunate night. After Newt had discovered his accounting fraud, he had threatened to inform Grandpa about it. He then grabbed a gun and left to confront Fim and Cure at the resort. Rhett, who was scared of being exposed, followed him there. When he confronted Newt at the boat, their confrontation continued, and Rhett accidentally knocked him unconscious. Not knowing what to do, he retrieved Newt's gun and gloves from the toolbox, shot him dead, and staged it as an accident. In the present, Prawning is left utterly shocked, but she has no choice but to protect her son. She then comforts him and promises to help him out of the situation. The next day, Prawning approaches Son and informs him that although the DNA samples have already been taken, she wants to clarify that Rhett had nothing to do with the murder. He was angry with Newt that night, but didn't mean him any harm. She lies and says Rhett fought with Newt because he discovered that his lover was having an affair with him. She then insists that Amara's brother Mac is actually the culprit. Fortunately, Son sees through the bullshit and realizes that this woman is trying to frame Amara's family, just as her father had expected. He then accuses Prawning of causing Fim's accident, and she demands proof, to which Son counters by asking if she has any proof of her own accusations. This leaves her speechless, so she simply returns home and tells Rhett that they need to get rid of Anne. He deviously responds that he already has a plan and a backup strategy. In a shocking twist, we see Rhett holding in an injection and brooding over it with evil eyes. Prawning then decides to tie up all these loose ends, so she calls Amara's dad and sends him 2 pictures, instructing him to kill the individuals in them. The pictures turn out to be of Amara and Mac, and it's revealed that she's unaware that they're his kids. Meanwhile, Fim summons Anne for a private conversation. She wants Cure to take on a fatherly role for her son due to her failing health. Anne says that she understands her concerns as an expected mother, but she can't allow such arrangements because she and Cure love each other. This reduces Fim to tears as she believes everybody hates her. The following day, our hero finds out that Anne hadn't come home the night before. Worried, he and Tony immediately head to the police station and report her missing. We then see Anne stumbling at Rhett's newly bought house. She recalls sitting in his car the other night, only to find Rhett sitting beside her. Just then he appears and arrogantly reveals that he drugged her. He then demands the original accounting files sent by the accounting manager. Anne denies having them, prompting Rhett to question her about her ongoing investigation with the police. We are then taken to the police station where Anne's mother arrives with crucial information. She reveals that Con, who used to be Anne's bodyguard, has employed a GPS tracker to trace her movements. It soon leads them to Rhett's house, and a bunch of cops rush to the location. However, upon arriving, they find the place empty. They continue to follow the device and eventually spot Rhett speeding away with an unconscious Anne in his car. During the chase, Cure receives a call from Fim. She confesses her eternal love for him and bids him an emotional farewell. This makes our hero realize that she intends to unalive herself. The scene then shifts to Fim as she recalls her precious memories with Cure. She prepares to dive off the bridge, but hesitates upon remembering her baby's heartbeat. Tragically, a truck collides with her car and sends her over the bridge. Meanwhile, the police surround Rhett. He and his evil mom are finally arrested and put behind bars. A few days later, Anne's family and friends attend a funeral home and light incense for the deceased souls. There are photos of Newt and his parents, and shockingly, Fim's photo is also present. Turns out, she died while undergoing treatment, but her baby son survived. Grandpa then reflects on his own mistakes and laments how his discriminating actions contributed to the tragic events in his family. Fim's mother reflects on her own mistakes too and resolves to make amends. She holds her grandson close and promises to raise him well. The old man then pledges to support her and the baby financially. He assures her that he wants Fim and Newt's son to be a part of their family when he grows up. At the police station, preparation for Rhett's trial proceeds until an unexpected visitor arrives. It turns out to be Mac's father. He confesses to his crimes and provides evidence of Rhett and his mom's involvement in the murder of their family members. This lands the mom and son in harsh punishment, possibly a death penalty. Now that everything is resolved, Cure visits Anne at her office and whisks her away to Bangkok for a big surprise. He shows her the house he bought her as an anniversary gift. Overjoyed, Anne enters to find the rooms beautifully decorated with flower petals. She then surprises him by revealing that she's pregnant. The show comes to an end as their friends join them and they celebrate the precious moments of love and happiness together.